All right. We are so excited to have everyone here today. Thank you for taking time out of your Thursday afternoon before the Thanksgiving holiday week to join us for this 1 hour deep dive into the question of how to achieve social selling success with LinkedIn and HubSpot. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. First of all, this program is being recorded. We will be sharing the Zoom recording link and password with everyone who registered to attend. In addition, we will also be publishing a version of this in video format on YouTube after the program. Another thing to keep in mind is that if you have questions, we'd love to take them. We'll do that in two ways. First of all, time permitting, at the end of the hour, we'll try to take a few questions. In addition, if you have questions that happen to be relevant to something we're discussing in a particular part of the program, please click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. It's in that Zoom bar at the bottom of your Zoom window. And when you click in there, you can type up a question, and then we can see it and answer it at that moment or at an appropriate further point where we know it'll be answered. So again, if you have questions that you want to share with us on the panel, please use the Q&A button on your Zoom screen. So again, thank you and welcome to our social selling program today. And with that in mind, we already had a question. Is there a handout to go with the discussion? Someone is really ready to make sure they get everything out of this program. Thank you for asking. No, but you'll have a copy of the slides sent to you post-program in PDF format. So I guess that'll be a handout. All you have to do is print it, and then you'll have it in hand. Great question. Glad you brought it up right off the bat. Thank you. So excellent. Let me make a few introductions. First of all, my name is Doug Wendt. I'm the Chief Growth Officer of Wendt Partners, and I'm really honored to be here today. This is the second part in a two-part series that we've been running on LinkedIn. We focused in our previous session a few months ago on developing and managing your profile and presence on LinkedIn, and Bruce Siegel, my guest and colleague, joined us for that. Bruce is back today to co-lead today's program. Bruce is our LinkedIn practice lead, and he is a well-recognized and established LinkedIn consultant based in the New York area. So while I'm speaking to everyone from the borough of Queens in the city, Bruce is joining us from Westchester County, just north of New York. He's trained hundreds of professionals in firms small and large in the professional services and related sectors. And in addition, he has a BA from Yale and an MBA from Stanford Business School. So we're really excited to have Bruce join us to talk about the role of LinkedIn in your business relationship strategy. So welcome, Bruce. All right. So you got it. So as we begin, we're first going to take just a few moments and establish a strategic framework from which we're going to work. So this program is focused on social selling strategies in the business to business world. Pretty much everything that we share certainly has applicability in other contexts. But in order to sort of set the stage, we're going to talk about two concepts that I think play particularly well with LinkedIn. These are both concepts that Bruce, myself, and the team at Wendt Partners utilize across the board in order to frame up the discussion of business growth strategy. And so this first piece is called the growth stack. And the growth stack is simply the idea that these 5 elements in terms of growing your business need to be integrated. And as you think about LinkedIn, LinkedIn actually has a role to play in all 5. So the first 2 are these orange strategic pillars, as we call them: business strategy and brand strategy. Right? So that's establishing the strategic foundation for your growth efforts. And LinkedIn has a role to play in helping you think about how you want to communicate and position your business strategy and in presenting your brand to the marketplace. Then the 3 pieces in the middle represent the execution part of the stack, or the execution stack. And we'll be talking about CRM, or customer relationship management, later. That's the foundation for execution. Upon that, we build the layer of sales, and then upon that layer, marketing. And again, LinkedIn has a role to play in CRM, in sales, and in marketing. So we'll be discussing LinkedIn with some reference to these 5 elements in the B2B growth stack. The second component that I want to share is the concentric growth philosophy or methodology. This is the methodology we use at Went Partners with our B2B clients. The idea here is simply as follows. In order to build your business with the strongest growth model, the strongest foundation for new sales possible, you want to start at that core with your core relationships, your promoters, your brand evangelists, your influencers in your industry, your strategic referral and business partners, and then leverage your overall customer community and work your way out from there to prospects, leads, suspects, and the marketplace. This has perfect applicability to today's discussion because, as with many business development efforts, we typically start with the question of how do I reach people I don't know? How do I start with that marketplace or those suspects? Very, very important. Obviously, we're going to dig into it today. But the first thing that you'll learn from Bruce's insights is that the best way to do that is to begin with the people, relationships, connections, and knowledge established at the core. So the two play in, they interact with one another in an integrated manner. The stronger you build that core, the more strategic, valid, and meaningful your interactions with new people are, and vice versa. So the B2B growth stack and concentric growth are the two methodologies that we use at Went Partners in all of our business growth consulting and execution. And I'm excited for us to explore how this applies in the LinkedIn environment today. So with that, we have a question that has probably an obvious tactical answer, but maybe not so obvious a strategic answer. And that is, why LinkedIn? You know, and I ask that question for a couple of reasons. There are lots of social media platforms out there. I'm doing a lot of business engagement actually on Facebook, and increasingly business people are participating more and more in building relationships on Instagram. Obviously, Twitter has a role to play. Email hasn't gone anywhere. So we have all these different channels and platforms for communication, some of them social media, some of them one-on-one. So in that context, what is LinkedIn and why should it be more than just another thing to check off my communication checklist? Why should I dedicate specific time, effort, and resources to LinkedIn? Bruce, what are some of your thoughts or perspectives on how is LinkedIn a different or unique environment? You know, is it social media? Is it a communication system for one-on-one? Is it its own unique thing that no one else has really been able to copy? What is LinkedIn in your mind?
We could talk about that for the full hour, but I just say its own unique way of business people networking with other business people. And there have been other, upstarts. Facebook made a play, is still making a play for businesses. There have been startups like RelPro, RelSci, but no one has really come close to LinkedIn in terms of its ubiquity. And it's an online networking platform. And where we are today is that if you want to network with other business people, 99.9% of that networking is going to be online, especially as we go through the winter. And go through some statistics later that show that the activity on LinkedIn for business people is really increasing since we've gone since the pandemic hit. The other thing that I think is a positive, I know we're going to talk a little bit about the Microsoft acquisition, and LinkedIn has diversified to some extent with things like e-learning that maybe take it away from that core mission around businesses networking with other businesses. But the good news is there's a new CEO of LinkedIn. Microsoft has maintained LinkedIn's autonomy, and there's a new CEO who's very committed to the members and members focus and people like ourselves that really use LinkedIn as a way for businesses to connect with other businesses.
And I think you made a good distinction that I'll briefly mention, which is there is a virtual library of LinkedIn modules, tools, systems, and components, you know, around that core of profiles and communications and pages is all these other elements, video, live events, LinkedIn Learning, as you mentioned, you know, and they could easily each have their own webinar or their own book for that matter. So we are focusing today, as you pointed out, on business relationship development, utilizing the core tools of LinkedIn, and also looking at LinkedIn Sales Navigator, which is one of those extensions.
Right, correct.
So with that in mind, Bruce, I know that you really wanted to focus on two key approaches to relationship development, and we'll dig into those. But first, does LinkedIn offer easy ways to create and nurture relationships? And I think the key in that question is easy, because I think we all probably agree that it can be done, but a lot of people are intimidated by the question of how and whether it's something they can really conquer. So what are your thoughts? Is it
Yeah,
easy in your opinion?
it really is easy. You just have to keep in mind that the answer is clearly yes to this question. And you have to keep in mind that LinkedIn offers, and we're going to go through these, several easy ways to develop, nurture, uncover both past relationships and new relationships. So in this very brief time that we have together, I'm going to go through 6 tools that you can use, all at no cost. So this is all available in the free LinkedIn platform. Some of it is
Excellent.
only on the desktop. So you have to be comfortable both with a desktop and a phone, but these are 6 tools that everyone on this webinar can employ today.
Got it. So for this first segment of instruction or review, you're going to be utilizing the free tools, and we're going to be focusing on organic relationship development, which I think is the perfect foundation. Excellent. So walk
So
us through them.
the first tool is really very, very simple. I mean, many of you are probably getting a lot of invites from people you don't know. And the typical answer is, well, I either reject them or accept them. And I'm suggesting something different. I've used this for many, many years with success, where it's really a triage. So yeah, there are people that you should accept. You should definitely message them. There are people that have no relevance to your network or your business objectives, and you should probably ignore them. But then there's a category in the middle of people that you kind of look at and you say, that's interesting. So for example, there was several years ago a business coach that approached me on LinkedIn for an invitation. And I sometimes do work with business coaches. And so before I accepted or rejected the invitation, I realized that this was the moment for engagement. So I engaged her and I said, well, I typically like to talk to people before connecting. And so we had a conversation that led to an in-person coffee back in the days when you could have coffee. And then I ended up presenting in a couple of webinars for her, ultimately helping her with her LinkedIn presence and getting her to a client that I helped with their LinkedIn presence. So the illustration, you'll see this in the slides, is there. It's a very simple tweak. Once you know where to look within LinkedIn, look to within your invitations, do a couple of clicks. It's only available on the desktop. And it's perfect. What I found is that worked extremely well. And now it's starting to work again as more people are spending time at home and frankly feeling a little bit isolated at points. So this is the perfect thing for them to be approached like, hey, Doug, saw your message, would love to do a quick phone call. And people now are more apt to accept than in the, say, a year or two ago.
Thank you. I just wanted to add before we move to tool number 2 that I think the real learning point there is that list of people who are asking to connect is an opportunity. There's that opportunity period between their request and your acceptance, when it's not even qualifying. That's certainly part of it, but the other is challenging them to take extra time and effort to engage with you. And then if they're willing to take you up on that challenge, the likelihood of a really meaningful business relationship is much stronger. So that is utilizing that opportunity to create that window, I think, is invaluable. That's really good. And I love the example that you gave where it worked for you.
Right. What I just would say on that point is that there's a moment for many of us have several hundreds or even thousands of connections. So you can't literally nurture all 1,200 or 700 or 1,800. So that moment where you get the invitation is the point of engagement. So just don't lose that opportunity. Doug,
excellent.
The whole slide here.
Sure, you got it.
The other thing that's really easy is to, once you have these connections, is messaging them and nurturing those connections that you already have. So hopefully all of you are using the LinkedIn messaging feature. It has increased dramatically. That's a statistic in the last 5 years, but you see quarter over quarter this year, messaging has gone up. You have news that you might want to share, articles, events that you're involved in. For example, I sent out some LinkedIn messages to let my valued contacts know that I was participating in this webinar with Doug. And I think some of you are on today. And it was, even if not, it was a good opportunity to just touch base with folks and let them know that, you know, I'm still around. Another thing that's new within the last year is on your phone, when you go to create a message, there's that little plus button over there on the slide.
Mm-hmm.
It then
right here.
to a point where you get these different options for messaging. So one thing that can work is leaving people an audio message rather than a text message. It's a little bit more personal. You can include attachments, photos, even GIF files. I'm starting to see more of those in my messages. The other thing, you can mention people, tag people. The other thing that's really cool is you could actually send up, if you're messaging someone, you could go where it says availability, you could link directly into a Zoom meeting from your LinkedIn messaging system if you have the proper connection set up.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's a way that you can very naturally evolve the relationship. And I should say that LinkedIn, I don't view these relationships as just LinkedIn relationships. I'm always looking for opportunities to then move the relationship off of LinkedIn into a phone call, into a Zoom call, hopefully into coffee when we get back to that point.
And I think that's the key. We're not calling this LinkedIn relationship development. We're calling it organic relationship development, where LinkedIn is the platform we're using to drive that forward. But by no means should it operate in a vacuum.
Right. The other thing that you can use very effectively is notifications from LinkedIn, so that they notify you when your connections have a work anniversary or a new job or their birthday. And LinkedIn offers a series of sort of AI kind of options, natural language, thanks, great job, congrats. I think those are, in terms of relationship development, I think they're next to worthless, but I would encourage you to use that information as a springboard. If someone has a 10-year anniversary at a job, a client, or a 25-year anniversary, send them a bottle of wine, offer to take them to lunch back in the days when we were able to go to lunch.
Hopefully those days will come back sometime, but for now, you're absolutely right on.
And when you get a notification, use that as an opportunity to reach back to the person and say, I just noticed that you have a new job, that you're now a partner in XYZ law firm, you have a new position. I know a mid-sized law firm in New York City that where one of the partners is using those notifications and then is able to reconnect with some of his contacts and get business short term by watching the notification feed properly.
And that brings us to number 4.
Number 4, I think that LinkedIn is an amazing way. Many of us have been working for many, many years. And so it's an amazing way to reconnect with people that you worked with in the past, or you worked at the same company and you just lost touch with them. So there is a feature, and I'm showing the illustration from Sales Navigator, but this is also available on the regular LinkedIn, where you can put in people that worked at, this is a company that I worked at from 2004 to 2010, an HR consulting company. I put in past, not current, and lo and behold, someone who was in HR consulting way back then was able to transition and become the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. So that could be, I did not personally work with Don, but if I had, it could be a great connection. It just shows that you don't really know what happens to people. They go in different directions. They have very successful and interesting transitions. So past, not current is really one of my favorite in leveraging those connections, figuring out where you've worked in the past, who you knew, and saying, I wonder what happened to people at those companies. LinkedIn is a fabulous way to reconnect. Also,
One,
I meant to say a moment ago that it's a great way to reconnect, also to use the intelligence from LinkedIn. So in other words, it's giving you a lot of really good information that you can then use to become smarter in a sales or relationship development situation. Where you went to school, for example, what hobbies you might have in common.
yes. And you know what? I'm going to mention something as we go to number 5, which is that everything you're talking about, Bruce, is predicated on a foundation of curiosity. I need to be interested in this. I need to be interested in, gee, where are my former coworkers? In this case, where are people I went to college with? What is going on? Whose birthdays are coming up? That curiosity is what leads to the generosity. And what you're giving us is a way to create moments of generosity in connecting with people. I think that's very, very powerful.
Right. And if you are curious, then the work at home is a great time to leverage that curiosity, because you might have a little bit more time. You're leveraging the time that you have in front of the computer. So
Yes.
think about with this one, where you're reconnecting with alumni, think of LinkedIn as this big database and algorithm, and that they organize in different ways. And in this particular organization, which is only available on the desktop, they allow you to input, if you put the whole slide in there,
Yep.
they allow you to input the years that you attended the school that you attended, in my case, Yale, and then it will narrow the alumni base down to just those people that went to Yale at the same time. It will even go by city. It will go by industry, by function. So you can then very quickly see from, there might be 120,000 alumni of your university. It's very quickly going down to 30 that might be in the location and the industry that you're interested in. This is
yes.
a thing to do when back in the days when I traveled, to say, hey, I wonder who in San Diego went to Yale at the same time as me. And even if I don't choose to look them up while I'm there, because it's a personal vacation, just to drop them a note and say, hey, I was in your area and thought of you.
Yes.
So those personal touches that, in this day of people receiving a lot of communications and a lot of emails and messages, those little personal touches allow you to, to break through the clutter, I think.
And so that brings us to number 6.
That's the last tool in this section is, people will say, well, don't I need email to contact people that I don't know on LinkedIn? And my message is that you can actually contact 15 people per month through groups. Excuse me. And what this means is that if, for example, Denise Peck and I are both part of the Stanford GSB alumni group, we're not connected. So I saw on her profile that she was part of the same group. And then I can message her, as you can see, even though we're a second connection, and this won't count against any of my in-mails. So you could do it. I did it by seeing the group that we were in common, looking at someone's profile. You could also identify the group that you want, so you could see that Denise was in this group. And even if I wasn't a member yet, I could join the group, and then that would allow me to be able to message her.
So this really demonstrates the importance of things like seriously considering what groups you want to participate in, making sure that you in your profile put your college or your other
Right.
institutions. All those affiliations create opportunities in the LinkedIn world.
Right. Yeah, I would just say that some people don't put their college graduation year profile, but this is a reason to put it in so that you could be found. Because if you don't have a year, when you do that 77 to 81, you won't pop up.
And that brings us to the second set of strategies around formal prospecting. So the distinction here is, in that first group, we were using entirely free tools, and we're utilizing those free tools to build and expand relationships, as you said, in an organic manner. Now we're going to supercharge it up a notch, and we're going to look at how to take the same sort of spirit or style, but focus it, hone it on a more formalized prospecting program.
Right. And just to elaborate on what you're saying, Doug, that in the first section, we were talking about things that you could do in sort of 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there, 15 minutes there. I recommend that my clients set an hour a week or 2 hours a week, 2 half-an-hour slots to their LinkedIn network. What we're talking about now, whether you use the free LinkedIn or the paid LinkedIn, is a formal prospecting program, and that is more concerted effort that one has to undertake. And like everything, as you pointed out in the beginning, it really starts with the strategy. You can't really just start prospecting. You really have to be mindful of who you're targeting, what is your message, how are you going to reach them, and we'll go through some of the options within LinkedIn. Then crafting an email that's a message rather that's really effective, executing it so that you're not, for example, sending your in-mails out at Sunday morning at 8 o'clock, then following up, monitoring. And then, like I've always been a big believer, whether it's LinkedIn or other parts of marketing, I've always tried to have a test and learn approach where you're going through this process and you're not just seeing what the results are and repeating it, but you're saying, okay, I got X results. How can I change my process in the future to make it even more effective? How can I learn as I go through this process multiple times?
Excellent. And so that sets a perfect framework for us to develop a process approach to prospecting, utilizing LinkedIn as one of our core tools. Take us forward.
Right. Next slide, please.
You got it.
Okay. So within LinkedIn, within free LinkedIn, there's an opportunity to do a lot of this prospecting, believe it or not. A lot of people are just stuck at that bar with a little magnifying glass in front and never really go beyond that. But if you click within that, you see that LinkedIn offers a wealth, even in the free service, of search options. You can search by location, by whether they're your first or second connection, the industry, which is tremendously valuable, people that have specific languages, for example, which might be relevant to some of your businesses. Again, what I talked about earlier with the current company and then the past company, that past not current. So I should just say that LinkedIn is in the process of revising this interface. So some of you may have an interface that's slightly different. From what I've seen, I still have this interface, but from what I've seen, it doesn't dramatically change the game. So you still get these filters, which, considering you're paying nothing, are really pretty good and allow you. So here's the critical thing. So these searches will result in a number of displays, be it 10 people or 50 people or 100 people that meet your search criteria. So the thing that within free LinkedIn that you need to do is I recommend that you have a mechanism to take whatever LinkedIn generates and take it out of LinkedIn right away. So LinkedIn does not allow you to save these prospects, or if you do save a search, it can be done. It's very kludgy. They don't like to really support you in that way. So whether it's a simple tool like an Excel spreadsheet or something like the HubSpot CRM that Doug's going to be talking about later, I think you must take the information that you get out of these free searches and bring it out of LinkedIn to somewhere where you can store and make notes about what you're doing, and most important, refer to the information later so that you're not just on the fly.
And then we have a second approach.
So the second approach is with LinkedIn's tool called Sales Navigator, which is their prospecting and insight system. It is a paid service. They offer different options. I pay $80 a month for it as a individual user. They do have enterprise options. And this allows you much more granularity in terms of the searching. So this is an example of searching for a chief information officer in the healthcare industry in the Atlanta area. So I specify it by the titles, by the size of the company, by the industry, of course. I don't know many people in healthcare in Atlanta, but I could. be specifying only first and second connections to make it more granular. And then the thing that I love, I mean, there's a lot of things about this search capability that I love, but I love that you could literally go city by city, town by town. I mean, if you want to be really granular and say, who lives right next to me, LinkedIn will allow you to do that. I have been off and on Sales Navigator the last couple of years, and each time I go back, it's just better and better. So for example, here they have up at the top there, they have people that have posted in LinkedIn in the last 30 days. So that's really important. That shows when you send your email, when you send your message, who might be likely to see it versus who's someone who just, never is on LinkedIn. Whether they're new to a job, which is a perfect time to approach them. So these things are really, really terrific.
Really powerful if I want to zero in on
it's just
people
like
who are most likely to engage.
You've got it. The zeroing in is really, really, really powerful. I think that just back up one more second. So LinkedIn, the Sales Navigator will allow you to save these searches, have different searches, save each prospect, tag the prospect. It gives you a lot more, but ultimately, and it will allow you to send out the message, the initial email, make a record of that. What it is not as a CRM system. So something as simple as saying, hey, I want to follow up with Doug in a week. That's more difficult, almost really impossible to do through Sales Navigator. So even here, you can run your campaign through Sales Navigator. You probably need something else to support you. And Doug, I know you're going to get into that.
Absolutely. But that's really, thank you for making that critical point on what Sales Navigator is and isn't.
Right. So with all these tools, the ways that you could communicate with people are in Sales Navigator. Once you identify your prospects, you can send them what's called an in-mail, which is a way to message someone that you don't know. You can, whether on free LinkedIn or Sales Navigator, you can send a connection request. And then once they're a connection, you can send them messages. That's the third way. Also, that group message is sort of a piece of that. That's mainly messages are for people that you already know, that you're already connected with. Now, what will happen if you have Sales Navigator? You'll have a Sales Navigator inbox and a quote LinkedIn inbox. They are not the same. So that's just a caveat that I wanted to point out. Even at an introductory sort of overview level, that's important to know. So you can send the emails, but you could also skip that step and simply just connect with people and then follow up 2 weeks later with a follow-up, say, hey, we connected and I just wanted to run an idea by you. I don't recommend following up the next day because that's perceived as salesy. I should say for all of these things, the trick is how to do your prospecting and sales on LinkedIn, but not to appear overly salesy.
Right.
Or even salesy in any respect. So that's a real challenge. So you have news that you can share on this initial approach. Some people have done free offers very effectively. But there are two things that are probably even more important. Offering real insight, surprise, even fun in your initial message. Just give some people in this tough environment we're in some reason to really open it and pay a little attention. The other thing that I love to do is personal connections. So for example, I sent a successful email to the other week to someone who had gone, a woman who had gone to where my daughter goes to school in the 1970s. And I just thought that was, there probably weren't a lot of women that went to that school in the 1970s. So I thought that was a good thing that we had in common. And I do think it enabled her to accept my email request.
Absolutely. And that shows the amount of thoughtfulness that you put into these communications as well.
Right. I'm very big believer in thoughtfulness. So we kind of covered some of this before, but some of the best practices for these emails or LinkedIn messages to keep them short, simple, conversational. LinkedIn has a guideline under 500 characters. I have a lot of trouble I'm often at like 5:50. I just can't, I have
Me
so much
too.
to say. But trying to keep them short, personalized, as I said, casual, and invite a dialogue that is genuine, so that my interest in that question with that fellow alum, really was genuine. Sometimes, Doug, not quite.
Nope. Sorry.
Sometimes
Take your
people will,
time.
spend all this time like on their message, and they have a great message, they run it by people, and then they just have like a crappy subject line, like following up or introducing myself. So the subject line, I'm sure you'll agree, Doug, from when partners, can be up to 50% of the effectiveness. So don't forget to spend that time there. The other thing that's interesting is the in-mails have a subject line, the LinkedIn messages don't. So, and then the last point I just wanted to make is that the initial approach is just the first step in a relationship. So you're not going to, to sell right from there.
Right. It was, I wanted to point out that you and I went to the same college. Now let me show you. Right. No, it doesn't work like that. Right.
Yeah.
It's relationship development, even if it's focused prospecting, right? It's
Right.
still the business of building a relationship that may lead to a sale. But that starts with the strategy in the relationship.
Right.
Excellent. And I wanted to ask you, just take a sentence or two and clarify for everyone, Bruce, because I mean, even I get confused and I'm in LinkedIn every day. What is an in-mail as opposed to the other tools? Like, why is it separate? What makes it unique?
Well, an in-mail allows you to send a message to someone connected to.
That you're not connected to. Got it.
That's really the difference. And that's only available within Sales Navigator, as well as something called LinkedIn Business, which is another option, another paid option that's not Sales Navigator, but has some additional benefits available to it.
So in the traditional, no, go ahead.
Go ahead. I think
in the traditional free side of LinkedIn, the whole idea is that you're not communicating in an interactive manner with someone unless they've accepted your connect request. And in-mail is a paid tool or a paid amount of access to that tool that allows you to potentially skip that step.
That's right.
Got it. Thank you. So anything else you want to bring up about making sure that the messaging is precise in our formal prospecting strategy?
No, I think I've covered some of the highlights.
Excellent. And so this brings us to, I think, a really big question, which is, if I want to initiate a formal program of effort to build out my LinkedIn network in a business aligned manner, right, in a manner that supports my social selling objectives, wouldn't it be easier if I could do that while I'm also working with my CRM system? So just to be clear, everything that Bruce has shared only requires LinkedIn. Some of it requires a paid edition, but everything that we've talked about up to this point operates completely in the LinkedIn ecosystem or universe. HubSpot takes us in another direction. It takes us to the next step. So LinkedIn is very, very selective and very much has a very walled garden approach to defining how people can interact with the platform. So the only way that a CRM or customer relationship management system can directly interact with LinkedIn is if the company that makes that software is a member of Snap, which is LinkedIn's Sales Navigator application platform initiative. To give you an idea, there are approximately 80 to 90 established CRM products in the B2B marketplace today. There are only 9 that are authorized members of the Snap partnership with LinkedIn. It's that small a club. There are HubSpot, Infor, Microsoft, Oracle, Pega, Salesforce.com, of course, SAP, Sugar, and Zoho. That's it. Only 9. So the question is, if we're going to go through the effort to select and implement one of these solutions, what does that gain for us? Why would I go through the effort of trying to connect HubSpot with my LinkedIn? So just to be clear, this integration involves both a certain paid edition of HubSpot and a certain paid edition of LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So we're definitely in a paid environment right now. This is the HubSpot CRM. I've happened to pull up Bruce's record in my database. So this is my contact record for Bruce with his contact details, my timeline of my communications with Bruce, and this tool here, which is the Sales Navigator widget. This is where the magic happens. So the first thing is that Sales Navigator will take the data from your contact record and attempt to determine what the most likely match is with the LinkedIn record. It'll present one to you, and then you can either say that's right or wrong. And if it's wrong, you can run a search and it will give you other options until you find the right person, and then you click match. So you're literally linking or matching your LinkedIn Sales Navigator record all around Bruce to your CRM record for Bruce. In addition, now I know whether he's a first level connection or not. And this saved button here is because I've saved him to a lead list in LinkedIn Sales Navigator. So the other thing this allows us to do is integrate our research in Sales Navigator with our research outside of Sales Navigator. In addition to that, I've also, and in our version of HubSpot at When Partners, we've also created a series of separate fields that are under our control that are not directly relying upon the Sales Navigator plugin to let us know, did we match this contact? Have we saved this as a lead? Who in the company is connected to this person? What is their company LinkedIn page URL, and so forth. And by the way, as Bruce mentioned earlier, LinkedIn sort of standard edition and LinkedIn Sales Navigator are different. And in fact, you'll see that there are two different URLs for Bruce's profile, one for his regular profile and one for his Sales Navigator profile. Now, one of the other things this allows me to do, let's suppose that Bruce is in my database and I want to reach out to him, but he's not a first level connection. I can send Sales Navigator in mail right from inside my CRM. Okay, so that's a real benefit, because if I'm working through my contacts in my CRM, I can begin to engage in the organic and strategic strategies or strategic efforts that Bruce outlined inside my CRM. In addition, you can click in on that record on this widget. Okay, there's a more button. And when you click on that, again, I'm still inside my CRM. I can look at more information, and it's feeding me some key details. So Bruce and I have 20 shared connections. It shows me his recent LinkedIn activity. And in addition, it shows me if we were not first level connections, there would be people on that get introduced list who are people who are first level connections of mine and of his. But since I'm not a first level connection of his, I might be able to use one of those relationships as a soft introduction channel. And then if there are other people he's connected to who are also in my lead list, one of my saved searches in Sales Navigator, that will also show up here. So this begins to really give us a framework for implementing the kinds of activities that Bruce shared, but doing it inside the LinkedIn environment and also inside the CRM environment. So here's the get introduced list. Again, if Bruce were a second level connection, one of our common friends and colleagues is Tony Carnisi. I could then click on this button and ask Tony to make an introduction for me in LinkedIn. The other thing that it allows me to do then is with one click, it's sending me over to Sales Navigator to my inbox to send that message to Tony to make that connection request. So there's a lot here. Obviously, that was a very high level view. But again, in summary, this allows us to engage in a number of these LinkedIn oriented activities while we're inside our CRM system. So that brings us to another topic that I know is a very hot button issue. And that is, what about third-party tools? So third-party tools are typically cloud applications. Some of them are Google Chrome extensions that you can subscribe to perform a number of different actions around LinkedIn. And this is a very challenging area. I'm going to give 3 examples. I'm not endorsing any of these. That doesn't mean that they're good or bad. I'm just staying neutral on them. But I'm giving them as examples of 3 different approaches to third-party tools. So the first approach is to append information from your searches. I think this is probably the least risky or the least problematic aspect, because we're taking information that we've gathered correctly, if you will, in LinkedIn, and we're simply using it to help us do research in other databases to match. Okay, so this is data appending. I've built this list of people on LinkedIn. It would be great to have their email addresses in my CRM. A tool like Wiza allows us to do this. There are still some challenges because LinkedIn has a pretty general policy of discouraging the use of these tools. Some of them bump up against usage requirements or licensing limits. Others really go right over and just ignore that line altogether, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But nonetheless, this is one thing to consider. By the way, at Went Partners, we don't use a direct third-party tool with LinkedIn. We go the other direction. We use a tool called Lead 411, which is a third-party lead research database, and they pull LinkedIn URLs through their research and provide it to us. So in that case, we're not actually driving our research from LinkedIn. We're utilizing LinkedIn purely as a communication platform. The second category of third-party tools, and this is where it's definitely caution light time, is tools for automating LinkedIn. And one of the dangers that we're all facing with LinkedIn right now is the number of people who are not taking the time to do any of the things that Bruce has shared and trying to automate that process. Now, there are some very legitimate use cases for automation. An example would be, sharing information about an event with my actual LinkedIn connections, let's say. That it still runs up against some of the challenges and limitations of the user agreement for LinkedIn. But at the end of the day, it's a legitimate, logical perspective. Like if we were doing that by email, no one would say that's problematic. However, keep in mind that if you use any of these tools in a manner that LinkedIn identifies as automation or an overlay on top of their platform, they can shut down your account. So that's why I say definitely a caution light. Some people hop right in and they send automated invitations or messages to thousands of people, and then they wonder why their account was closed within 24 hours. The other thing I will say that's a caution here is do not think that you can use automation tools to replace the work of building relationships. If you're going to consider automation tools, use them to enhance in a limited capacity the good work that you're already performing based on the strategies that Bruce has shared. The third component is to use connector tools. So as I showed, HubSpot has a officially licensed integration with LinkedIn Sales Navigator. However, you have to have the professional edition of HubSpot. You have to have the Sales Navigator Team edition. It all adds up. What if you're a single solo user and you want to have some kind of connection that doesn't require those tools? There are tools such as Hubris, which is a third-party LinkedIn to HubSpot connector. I still would recommend a caution light. If you consider one of these tools, just understand they're not an official licensed partner of either vendor. Doesn't mean that you can't use them. But again, use sparingly. It's like salt in cooking. You want to use it just a little in order to enhance the flavor of the hard work you're doing to make a great meal for your guests, which are the people that you're trying to build relationships with. If you just throw the salt out there, all you're going to do is wreck the meal. So do not think of these third-party tools as ways to skip ahead of the hard work that we've talked about. And again, in any of these three scenarios, the least dangerous scenario is to take LinkedIn information and look at other databases to add to it so that you can connect with people in multiple ways. Once you get involved in actually extracting data or cross-connecting it, or then going from there and actually automating your work on top of the LinkedIn interface, definitely a caution light. Use sparingly, if at all. And my closing comment on this is, if you haven't mastered the work that we just talked about, that Bruce described, like level 1, building organic relationships, having the discipline to do that. Level 2, now developing and executing a strategic campaign or a strategic initiative around focused prospecting. If you haven't crawled successfully and you haven't walked successfully, you will utterly fail at running. So first crawl, then walk, then consider how you can run. And so let me open it up back to Bruce. Any comments or questions that you want to make sure we cover, or what are your thoughts on third-party tools?
Yeah, it's an area that I haven't spent a lot of time. I agree. It kind of runs counter, number one, to my philosophy around prospecting, which is really very personalized, very much around relationship development. I don't think it's a good service to the community right now because a lot of
Yes.
people are under a lot of pressure. And so I don't think you're necessarily making the recipients' lives easier. And
Mm.
personally, I just couldn't really afford to have my LinkedIn account closed. So,
Right. Right. And I think I'm going to close this section out with a point that ties to something that you were alluding to. People get all excited about the number of people they're going to reach out to. And certainly in sales, consistency, discipline, and volume have a role to play. But at the end of the day, if I reach out to 500 people and I develop 25 solid relationships, wouldn't it be better to reach out to 25 people and develop perhaps 25 solid relationships? It's not the volume at the end of the day that defines your success, it's the quality. And in fact, if you take the volume driven approach, you may miss the opportunity to develop those meaningful relationships. So I'm not surprised when people say, I reached out to thousands of people and I got no interest. Well, it's because you had nothing to offer because you didn't take the steps that Bruce has presented today. The thoughtfulness, the curiosity, the willingness to invest time and effort in the discipline of being a meaningful and engaged business colleague to the folks you're reaching out to.
the other thing that if you reached out to thousands of people, sometimes people will say, well, I got a piece of business, but also consider the people that you may have alienated. So usually the B2B audiences that
Yes.
and partners is focused on, it's a limited audience. So you may have actually alienated some people with your automation. So that's
Absolutely. And that's why I go back to that example with what we showed with HubSpot CRM and LinkedIn. Is it perfect? No. Can it solve every possible use case scenario? No. But what I like about it is it allows me to legitimately and strategically do the work that Bruce has outlined in a more integrated manner simply because I'm doing it in one environment. And so no matter what channels of communication I'm engaged in, I'm able to do it centrally. And so I think that's if you're going to invest time, effort, and money into a LinkedIn paid component, I would suggest that that's where you want to go first and foremost. So I know that we wanted to just spend a moment here and make sure that that we let the audience know that you and I have had the pleasure of developing as part of our offerings in the Went Partners client community a series of LinkedIn solutions for business growth. We could literally do a whole webinar just on these. But for those of you who are joining us, we've developed a series of paid options, paid offerings around developing your presence, publishing consistent and meaningful communication, executing targeted outreach, similar to what we talked about today, pursuing strategic business relationships, promoting, that involves a whole nother aspect of LinkedIn, which is LinkedIn advertising and paid ways to generate qualified leads, and programming, which is tying all of the pieces together. So as you can see, there's a lot. We first want you to feel that you can crawl and walk by following the best practices that Bruce has shared here. When you're ready to walk faster or maybe run, just know that our team is ready to support you and your team in a strategic effort together. Bruce, anything you want to add on the solutions approach?
no, I think you covered it.
So let's take a pause here and open the floor up to questions. So again, we have a few moments. We'll probably be able to take a couple of questions. Just click on the Q&A button and share your question with us there. I know we already have a few. So while we're giving people a chance to think about that, let me go ahead and put one question on the table. What can I expect out of this? If I spend an hour a day, every day for the next 3 months doing this, what's my return on investment, Bruce?
Well, I think that's it's a good question, Doug. And I would say that for particularly on the organic relationship development, remember that you're really in social media and
Mm,
in a community, and social media is about giving and taking. And so to have a clear expectation around that, if I spend an hour a week, within a month, it better start returning, that is not really that realistic.
mm-hmm.
Even on the paid, I think that you have to look at what you're doing as really, I'm sorry, not on the paid, on the formal prospecting, you have to look at it as really you're developing the initial phases of and nurturing the initial phases of a relationship.
Mm.
There's a caution there. For example, I'm talking tomorrow afternoon to somebody that I approached through a prospecting campaign in the late summer. And this is only our second conversation.
So the key is discipline, consistency, and follow through.
Yeah.
Let me bring up one other question here. Sales Navigator, Bruce, yes or no?
Well, I think that it really, I think that if you're serious about prospecting, it probably is a yes. If you need the precision in your prospecting, you probably do want to invest. What I would say is that LinkedIn often offers, and their rates and their promotions are not available across the board, but if each individual probably has a free month of Sales Navigator that they could take advantage of. The other thing that you could do is join Sales Navigator if December, for example, is a planning month for you because you don't want to be spending a lot of time in direct solicitations. You can subscribe to Sales Navigator for that month of December, and then do your prospecting, as I said, the information into something like HubSpot CRM or another tool.
Right.
You can drop your Sales Navigator at the end of that point.
So I think the key learning there, I'm going to conclude with two thoughts on that. Number one, crawl, walk, run. So if you're not comfortable with LinkedIn, don't jump into Sales Navigator. First, learn the core. Right. And second of all, think about how you're going to use Sales Navigator. Is it primarily as a research tool? Is it primarily as a communication platform? Is it both? And then let that guide your decision-making process. Have a business objective before we assume just to add the technology.
Right. And then on a tactical point, if you're a part of a small sales team and you had an inside salesperson or a sales support person, they could be the one with the Sales Navigator.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us today. It is 1:00 on the dot Eastern Standard Time. We hope you enjoyed this hour-long program. Again, you will receive the opportunity to review this recording, both on Zoom and also through the YouTube video. In addition to that, as a participant or a registrant, you will also receive a downloadable PDF of the slides, which can serve as your refresh and guide to beginning to implement some of the practices shared here. Obviously, there's a lot to explore. There's a world of opportunity in social selling and relationship development with LinkedIn and with LinkedIn and HubSpot. So thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of your week and have a wonderful Thanksgiving as well. Bruce, thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, Doug. It's been my pleasure.
Absolutely. Everybody, thank you and have a great rest of your day.